Acrylic paint is a fast-drying paint made of pigment suspended in acrylic polymer emulsion and plasticizers, silicon oils, defoamers, stabilizers, and metal soaps. Acrylic paints are water-soluble but become water-resistant when dry. Wash, a technique whereby thin, transparent layers of paint are applied to the paper or canvas. Acrylic paints can be used in this way if they're diluted with water. If the wash is applied to a raw, unprimed canvas, the technique is called staining, as the canvas will soak up the pigment. So you can see I'm just mixing the paint pigment with water and simply going over one of the boxes. Scumbling needs to have 2 layers, so apply a wash, and glazing needs 2 layers as well. Broken colour. The effect achieved when paint is applied to textured strokes which leaves fragments of previously applied colours showing through the upper layer. This technique can create the impression of a greater variety of colour because of the optical mixing, e.g. the eye mixes the colours together to create new colours. I'm going to get my yellow and I'm just going to put it onto the paper in a random way because it's primed with yellow. Obviously mixing it with blue makes green. And again, I'm not mixing the colours on the paper. I just want them to be separate brush strokes with separate bits of colour. And now I'm just placing green over the top. It'll give an optical illusion when looked at from a distance. Blending, any technique of merging 2 or more paint colours or tones so they transition from one to the other and it's smooth and continuous. There are no defining edges between the tones or the colour. So I'm putting down yellow. I need a little bit more yellow. And I'm doing this with a brush that does not have any water in it. I'm then getting a clean brush, a dry brush, and I'm priming it with red, and I'm going from the other way. So I'm wanting to have a blend of one colour going into another. Now that I've got the red on there, I can go back through with my yellow and I can wet on wet mix the colours in the middle. Because I've got a little bit too much red on my brush, that's why it's a little bit darker than I would like. So I'm just going to get some more yellow. Blending is one of those techniques that it's good to try a few times before you get it right. Some colours blend beautifully together and some don't. So you can see again, I've got one brush for my yellow, one brush for my red, and you can see that there is a bit of a divide. So if we just wet on wet blend, and then the transition from yellow to red is complete. You can go the other way. I prefer to go the light colour to the dark, but if you're going to go the dark colour to the light, see how you go. I have a fair bit of red on that brush, so I am putting a bit of water into this one. And you can see that it is now blending from the dark to the light. I've probably still got a little bit too much red on my brush. I'm just going to try and get that off a little bit. But you can see that there's a blend there. If you're going to go, a green blend, maybe into that blue. So you can see the colour choice isn't great on this particular one. Probably need a little bit more blue because at the moment all I can see is green and darker green. You could go the other way, but you can see that this one wasn't successful and the rest were. Sgraffito, a technique whereby a design is scratched into a reasonably thick layer of paint to reveal the canvas, paper, or painted surface underneath. The design or pattern can only be scratched into the paint while the paint is still wet or soft. So I'm painting this with a thick part of dark blue, just wanting to make it a nice thick layer. Then I'm going to turn my brush around and I'm going to write art is great. If you don't like it, paint over the top of it. And then you can scratch in a different surface. Maybe we're going to put a pattern in there. Dry brush, a technique which produces an effect of ragged, mottled colour. The brush is barely charged with paint and is pulled across the paper or canvas at a very shallow angle so that the flat surface of the brush makes contact instead of the tip. The greater textural quality is achieved if the canvas, paper, or painted surface underneath has a texture or coarse grain. So I'm getting paint charged off of my brush, just using the newspaper, and then just going over the top of it to have a dry brush technique. Scumbling, a technique of working a thin layer of opaque colour over a previously applied colour in such a way that the colour underneath is not completely covered. There are various ways of applying the paint, including feathers or scrubbed brush strokes. So scumbling is just dry brush over the top of a wash. Glazing, a technique whereby a thin layer of colour is applied over dried, previously applied paint. The transparent glaze therefore changes the colour of the underpainted surface. Glazing can be used to intensify the textured surface of underpainting. So what I'm doing is putting a wash over a wash. That's basically what glazing is. Impasto, thickly applied paint that forms a textured finish on the canvas or paper. The paint clearly shows the marks of the brush or the knife that was used in the application. So impasto medium is being used for this particular technique. You can apply acrylic paint very thickly, but I like using this medium because it holds the body well. Using a clean palette knife, and I'm actually putting the impasto onto newspaper because I don't want it to be on my palette, because impasto should not be washed down the sink because it does dry hard. It's like a big plastic. So you can see the acrylic paint's just been put over the top. I'm mixing it with my palette knife and I'm just lifting it onto my paper. You can see I'm applying it quite thickly. It does dry in this consistency and it will hold its body with this medium. So you can make it quite thick. You could also make it a little bit thin. It's really important that the palette is cleaned with a newspaper. We don't want to be washing any of this medium down the sinks. And that's why we're using the newspaper as a palette. So you can see this one is a thinly applied one. And then we can just put the newspaper in the bin.